Everything you know about human civilization is a lie. Not the kind of lie someone tells you. The kind of lie that geography tells you when it drowns your history under 400 feet of ocean water. Agriculture wasn't invented. It was forced on starving survivors of a cosmic impact, and I can prove it. There's a reason your history textbook starts at 3100 BCE with Sumer and Egypt. It's not because civilization began then. It's because that's when people finally had enough stability to write things down again. Everything before that, gone, drowned, buried under continental shelves the size of India. For the past 6 months, I've been digging through geological reports, underwater archaeology studies, and ancient texts that nobody talks about. What I found will change how you see every city, every farm, every monument on this planet. This isn't ancient aliens. This is peer-reviewed science that mainstream archaeology doesn't want to touch. So let me show you the world that ended before the Great Flood. Here's the problem with human history as we're taught it. We're told civilization is about 5,000 years old. Mesopotamia invents writing. Egypt builds pyramids. China develops bronze working. Neat linear progression from cavemen to cities. Except humans have been anatomically modern for 300,000 years. Behaviorally modern for at least 100,000 years. Think about that math. 100,000 years of humans who were just as smart as us, just as creative, just as capable. But supposedly they just wandered around hunting gazelles and picking berries for 95,000 of those years before someone in Sumer figured out how to plant wheat. Does that make sense to you? It shouldn't, because it's not what happened. What happened is that the most habitable land in human history is now underwater. During the last ice age, sea levels were 120 meters lower than today. That's almost 400 feet. Entire continents of prime real estate were exposed, and that's where people lived. Not in the mountains, not in the deserts, in the fertile river valleys and coastal plains that are now continental shelves. Let me give you scale on what we lost. Sundaland was a landmass connecting Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Borneo, and the Philippines. Twice the size of India. During the Ice Age, this was an ocean. This was dry land with a tropical climate even during the global freeze. And then between 14,600 and 8,000 years ago, the sea level rose 120 meters and swallowed the whole thing. Doggerland connected Britain to continental Europe. The North Sea didn't exist. It was land, with rivers and forests and Mesolithic hunting camps. Gone. The Persian Gulf was a river valley called the Gulf Oasis, 800 kilometers long, 200 kilometers wide. Some researchers think humans lived there for 100,000 years. The entire basin went underwater between 8,000 and 7,500 years ago. You want to know why every ancient culture has a flood myth? It's not because one guy named Noah built a boat. It's because coastal populations all over the world watched their homelands disappear into the ocean within living memory. And they told their children. And their children told their children, and those stories became the myths we call legends today. But here's where it gets interesting. The flooding wasn't gradual. It came in pulses, sudden jumps in sea level that would have been experienced as apocalyptic events. The geological term is meltwater pulses, and there were two big ones that matter to our story. Part 1, the fire. Let me take you back 12,900 years. You're living in what we now call Syria. The village is called Abu Hurura. Your people have lived here for generations. You hunt gazelle. You collect wild grain. You have a good life. The climate is warming after the Ice Age. Things are getting better. And then one day the sky catches fire. I'm not being dramatic. This is what the evidence shows. In 2020, researchers published a paper in Scientific Reports analyzing the Abu Hurura site. They found something that shouldn't exist at a Neolithic settlement. Melt glass. That's silicate material melted at temperatures above 2,200 degrees Celsius. You don't get that from cooking fires. You don't get that from forest fires. You get that from atmospheric entry. They found cubic and hexagonal nanodiamonds. These form under shock pressures measured in gigapascals. That's the kind of pressure you get from meteorite impacts. They found platinum anomalies with the signature of extraterrestrial material. They found plant matter flash frozen inside the megaliths while the plants were still standing. Abu Hurira was destroyed by an airburst, a cosmic impact event similar to Tunguska in 1908, but much more powerful. The evidence is undeniable, and it happened exactly at the beginning of a 1,200-year climate disaster called the Younger Dryas. Here's what that means. For thousands of years, the Earth had been gradually warming up after the Ice Age, and then suddenly, 12,900 years ago, temperatures crashed back to near-glacial conditions. This wasn't a slow change. This was a geological emergency. The northern hemisphere got plunged into an impact winter that lasted over a millennium. Now for years scientists debated what caused the Younger Dryas. The mainstream theory was that melting ice sheets disrupted ocean currents, but the Abu Hurira evidence changes everything. A large comet broke apart in the inner solar system. Its fragments hit Earth's atmosphere. The impacts and airbursts caused massive wildfires. The smoke and debris blocked out the sun. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation shut down. The world went into a deep freeze. And here's the thing that nobody talks about, the black mat layer. It's a carbon-rich sediment layer found all across North America and Europe at exactly the Younger Dryas boundary. For decades, researchers couldn't explain it. Now we know. It's the remnant of continental-scale wildfires triggered by cosmic impacts. The world burned, and then it froze. The megafauna went extinct, not gradually, suddenly. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, 35 genera of large animals disappeared from North America in a geological instant. The same pattern repeats globally. Australia loses its megafauna. South America loses its megafauna. These aren't separate events. This is one global catastrophe. And humans were there. They watched it happen. The oral traditions remember. The Hopi speak of the third world being destroyed by fire. The Inca talk about the Pachacuti, the overturning of space and time when fire fell from heaven and floods covered the earth. These aren't myths. These are memories. Let me show you what happened next at Abu Hurira. Before the impact, the skeletal evidence shows healthy, tall people eating diverse diets. Gazelle, pistachios, wild lentils. After the impact, the survivors are physically smaller. Their bones show arthritis in their toes and damaged vertebrae, the signature of grueling manual labor. They're farming, not because they wanted to, because the airburst destroyed the wild grain stands and the gazelle migration routes. Agriculture wasn't an innovation, it was desperation. It was what you did when everything better was gone. And they're building something that shouldn't exist 11,600 years ago. 35 kilometers from Abu Hurira on a hilltop in southern Turkey, they carve massive pillars out of bedrock. They decorate them with intricate reliefs of scorpions, vultures, snakes, and spiders, creatures of death and venom. They call this place Göbekli Tepe, and it's a monument to trauma. Part 2. The water. The Younger Dryas ended as suddenly as it began. 11,600 years ago, temperatures spiked. The ice sheets that had been stable for over 1,000 years started collapsing, and the water had to go somewhere. Meltwater pulse 1b between 11,400 and 11,100 years ago, global sea levels rose 10 to 15 meters. That's 33 to 50 feet. In 300 years. If you're living on a coastal plain or in a river delta, this isn't a gradual encroachment. This is watching your world disappear. Let me put this in perspective. Modern sea level rise is about 3 millimeters per year. That's what causes all our current climate anxiety. Meltwater pulse 1b was averaging 40 millimeters per year, more than 10 times faster, for 3 centuries. The Persian Gulf oasis went underwater. 800 kilometers of inhabited river valley turned into seabed. If you want to understand Mesopotamian flood traditions, start here. The Sumerian king list says kingship was lowered from heaven before the flood. Then the flood swept over. Then kingship was lowered from heaven again. They're describing a civilization that existed, got destroyed, and had to be rebuilt. The Apollo traditions make more sense now too. In Mesopotamian texts, civilization isn't a human invention. It's taught by 7 sages who came from the Apsu, the watery abyss. They emerge from the ocean to teach humanity the arts of civilization. If you're a refugee from a drowned coastline arriving at highland settlements with knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and astronomy, you're going to look like a sage emerging from the waters. Sunderland was going underwater at the same time. Genetic studies of Southeast Asian populations show a forced migration signature. Bottleneck events and divergence patterns that align perfectly with the rapid sea level rise. The Malaysian Negritos and other Aboriginal groups carry the genetic memory of displacement. In 2025, dredging operations in the Madura straight off the coast of Java recovered over 6,000 fossil specimens from a submerged river valley. Among them were cranial fragments of Homo erectus dated to 140,000 years ago. The fossils showed tool cut marks, proof that these now drowned valleys were active hunting grounds. This is the smoking gun. The continental shelves weren't empty wilderness. They were prime real estate supporting human populations. And when the water came, those populations had to move. Fast. Doggerland survived longer. The high points became an archipelago as sea levels rose. The Dogger Bank became an island. Mesolithic communities adapted, moving to higher ground as the coastline shifted. But around 6200 BCE, something catastrophic happened. The Storegga Slide, a section of the Norwegian continental shelf, the size of Scotland, collapsed into the deep ocean. The submarine landslide generated a tsunami. Computer models show run-up heights exceeding 20 meters on the Scottish coast and across what remained of Doggerland. That's a 65-foot wall of water racing across the North Sea. Archaeological evidence from the seafloor shows a sudden cessation of human activity after this event. No gradual abandonment, no slow cultural transition, just silence. The survivors carried memories of the great wave that destroyed their world. These memories would become the Nordic traditions of Ragnarok and the Celtic legends of drowned lands. But the flooding wasn't just about sea level rise. The post-glacial world was hydrologically unstable. Glacial lakes formed behind ice dams that would periodically fail. When they did, the results were apocalyptic. The Tsangpo River Gorge in Tibet holds evidence of at least 2 Holocene glacial lake outburst floods. A glacier advanced across the river, creating a dam. Water backed up behind it, forming a massive lake. Eventually, the dam failed. The lake drained catastrophically through the world's deepest river gorge, discharge rates that exceeded the Amazon River. Tibetan Buddhist tradition preserves the story. Guru Rinpoche brings Buddhism to Tibet in the 8th century by performing miracles. One of these miracles is defeating a demon who lived in a great lake by draining it. The geological evidence and the cultural memory align. The geomythology is real. These kinds of outburst floods happened globally during deglaciation. The Missoula floods in the Pacific Northwest carved the channeled scablands. The Altai floods reshaped Central Asia. Anywhere ice dams formed, they eventually failed. And the human communities in the path of these floods were annihilated. Now imagine you're a survivor. Your people lived on coastal plains that are now underwater. Your ancestors told stories of valleys that were paradise before the waters came. You've moved to the highlands. You've started farming because you have to. You're building permanent structures for the first time because you need protection from the chaos. And you're traumatized. You don't have words for it yet. Post-traumatic stress disorder won't be named for another 13,000 years, but you have the symptoms: hypervigilance, intrusive memories, The conviction that the world is fundamentally dangerous and the sky could fall at any moment. So you build monuments, not to celebrate, to remember, to warn, to try to control the cosmic forces that destroyed your world. Part 3. The response. Göbekli Tepe was built immediately after the Younger Dryas. The dating is precise. The oldest layer is 9500 BCE. That's 11,500 years ago. This is the earliest known megalithic structure on Earth, and it predates agriculture at that site. Let that sink in. The conventional narrative says that agriculture comes first. Farming creates food surplus. Food surplus allows specialization. Specialization leads to monumental architecture. But at Göbekli Tepe, the sequence is reversed. They built the monument first. Then they started farming. The iconography tells you why. This isn't a temple to fertility and abundance. This is a memorial to extinction. The pillars are covered with scorpions, vultures, snakes, spiders, and foxes, creatures associated with death, venom, and scavenging. The message is clear. This is about what was lost. Pillar 43, the vulture stone, shows a headless man. Some researchers interpret this as an astronomical date marker. The scorpion represents Scorpio. The vulture represents Cygnus or Lyra. Together, they might encode the position of the sky on the night the impacts occurred. Whether that specific interpretation is correct or not, the thematic content is undeniable. This is a monument to catastrophe. 35 kilometers away is Karahan Tepe. Excavated more intensively starting in 2023, it's even more disturbing than Göbekli Tepe. Instead of circular enclosures built above ground, Karahan Tepe features chambers carved directly into bedrock. They're descending back into the womb of the earth. In 2024, excavators found a 2.3-meter tall statue of a seated human figure. The details are striking. The face is realistic and alive, but the ribs are prominently displayed. The figure is emaciated, and there's a clearly defined phallus. Life in the midst of death, fertility despite starvation, generation in the face of extinction. This is the psychological state of the survivors. The dualism is encoded in stone. The central enclosure at Karahan Tepe has a serpent head carved from the rock. It's positioned to align with the winter solstice. On the shortest day of the year, sunlight enters through a porthole and illuminates the serpent's head. This isn't decoration. This is an obsession with the return of light, a prayer that the sun will keep coming back, that the impact winter won't return. These weren't primitive people building crude monuments. The engineering is sophisticated. At Nevali Sari, another pre-pottery Neolithic site, they made terrazzo floors from lime cement. You don't just mix lime and water. You have to burn limestone at 800 to 900 degrees Celsius for several days. That's an industrial process requiring massive fuel management, chemical knowledge, and labor organization. And they only used it for cult buildings, not houses, not storage, religious architecture. The technology was reserved for sacred purposes. They had specialized techno-priests who preserved and applied high-energy chemistry solely for ritual containment. This pattern repeats across the Taş Tepeler region in Turkey. Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Nevali Sari, Bankaklu Tarla, Seyfa Tepe, all built in the same era, all showing the same obsession with monumental sacred architecture, all appearing at the moment when the world was most traumatized. The skull cults appear. At sites like Saddlehuruk and Jericho, people start plastering human skulls and painting them to look alive. They keep them in their homes. They bury them beneath floors. The dead are not being allowed to leave. The ancestors must be kept close because the world is too dangerous without their protection. Agriculture spreads during this period, but look at how it spreads. It doesn't radiate smoothly from a single center of innovation. It appears in multiple locations almost simultaneously. The Fertile Crescent, the Yangtze River Valley, Mesoamerica, West Africa, different crops, different techniques, but the same desperation. The demographic evidence shows something disturbing. Early farming populations are less healthy than their hunter-gatherer predecessors. They're shorter. They have more dental problems. They show signs of nutritional deficiency and infectious disease. The transition to agriculture wasn't upward mobility. It was downward adaptation to a world where the easy options were gone. And they remember what caused it. Every ancient tradition preserves some version of the catastrophe, the Younger Dryas impact and the subsequent flooding. In India, the Matsya Purana tells the story of Manu. A fish warns him of a coming flood. He builds a boat. He survives. He lands on a northern mountain and performs sacrifices. The narrative tracks a population movement from the low-lying Indian continental shelf northward toward the Himalayas as sea levels rose. In Egypt, the Shamsu-Hor tradition describes semi-divine kings who ruled for thousands of years before the historical pharaohs. The conventional interpretation dismisses this as mythology, but archaeological evidence from Tomb Uj at Abydos proves there was a complex, literate pre-dynastic civilization. The Nakada III culture unified the Nile Valley as the Sahara dried up and populations compressed into the river valley. The desiccation of the Green Sahara between 5000 and 3500 BCE was the Egyptian equivalent of the flood. It was a climatic forcing event that necessitated the creation of centralized states. The pharaonic system was crisis management. Every civilization that appears in the conventional historical record has the same origin story. Environmental catastrophe forced populations into limited territories. Competition for resources required organization. Organization required hierarchies. Hierarchies required writing to administer. Writing gives us history. But the writing doesn't tell us about the world before the catastrophe. It tells us about the recovery. The monuments aren't celebrating progress. They're attempting to prevent regression. Every temple is a prayer that the waters won't come again. Part 4, the evidence speaks. Let me show you how comprehensive this evidence is, because I know what you're thinking. This sounds like fringe speculation. It's not. This is published research, peer-reviewed papers, data from multiple disciplines converging on the same conclusion. Geologically, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has been controversial, but the evidence keeps accumulating. In 2024, a paper in PLOS One documented shocked quartz at the Younger Dryas boundary. Shocked quartz forms under the kind of pressure generated by meteorite impacts and nuclear explosions. You don't get it from volcanism or forest fires. The Abu Huraira evidence is definitive. Two major papers in 2023 from multiple research teams confirmed the melt glass, the nanodiamonds, the platinum anomalies, the vaporized flora embedded in glass. The thermal pulse was real. The airburst happened. For years, critics said there was no impact crater, but you don't need a crater for an airburst. Tunguska in 1908 leveled 2,000 square kilometers of Siberian forest, and there's no crater. The impactor exploded in the atmosphere. The energy was delivered thermally and through shock waves. That's what happened 12,900 years ago, but on a much larger scale. The Hiawatha crater under Greenland was initially proposed as the impact site, but radiometric dating published in 2022 and confirmed in 2025 shows it's 58 million years old. Late Paleocene. That decouples it from the Younger Dryas. But it doesn't invalidate the impact hypothesis. The evidence suggests multiple airbursts from a fragmented comet rather than a single ground impact. The black mat layer has been documented at over 50 sites across North America. It's a carbon-rich sediment containing nanodiamonds, magnetic spherules, and other impact proxies. The same markers appear in Europe. The Greenland ice cores show a massive platinum spike at the Younger Dryas boundary. The signal is global. The megafauna extinction correlates precisely with the impacts, not gradually over thousands of years. Suddenly, at 12,900 years ago, The probability that this is coincidental is effectively zero. And then the climate crashed. The Greenland ice cores show the temperature drop. It's not gradual, it's a cliff. Within decades, the northern hemisphere went from post-glacial warming to near-glacial cold. The AMOC shut down. The North Atlantic stopped circulating warm water from the tropics. Northern Europe and North America froze. The meltwater pulse chronology is well established. NASA's data shows meltwater pulse 1A around 14,600 years ago raised sea levels 16 to 25 meters. That's 50 to 80 feet. Then a period of stability during the Younger Dryas. Then meltwater pulse 1B around 11,300 years ago with another 10 to 15 meters. That's an additional 33 to 50 feet. The total sea level rise from the last glacial maximum to the present is about 120 meters. Most of that happened between 14,600 and 8,000 years ago. The world's geography was fundamentally rewritten in 6,000 years. The submerged landscapes are being mapped. The Paleo-Arun River system off the south coast of England has been surveyed. Prehistoric sediments survive beneath the seabed. The North Sea's Dogger Bank shows evidence of Mesolithic habitation before it went underwater. The Persian Gulf Basin has been studied extensively. The entire floor of the modern Gulf was dry land during the Ice Age. River systems drained through it. The environmental conditions were optimal for human habitation. And then between 8,000 and 7,500 years ago, the sea invaded. The sudden appearance of settlements around the Gulf margins after this date suggests population displacement from the drowned basin. Sunderland is harder to study because it's deeper water, but the 2025 discovery of Homo erectus fossils in the Java Sea proves the principle. Submerged river valleys were sites of human activity, and not just during the Ice Age. The fossils are 140,000 years old, but they establish that now-drowned lowlands supported hominin populations. The genetic evidence supports forced migrations. Studies of Southeast Asian populations identify bottleneck events and divergence patterns consistent with rapid sea level rise. Populations that had been continuous for thousands of years suddenly show signs of fragmentation and displacement. The archaeological evidence from Abu Hurira is unambiguous. The pre-Younger Dryas occupation shows a healthy hunter-gatherer population. The post-Younger Dryas occupation shows the adoption of agriculture and signs of physical stress. The airburst layer sits between them. The sequence is clear. Göbekli Tepe has been radiocarbon dated dozens of times. The oldest layer is 9,500 BCE. That's 11,500 years ago. The site was active for about 1,500 years and then deliberately buried around 8,000 BCE. Nobody knows why, but they filled it in with rubble and walked away. Karahan Tepe's central complex dates to the same period. The winter solstice alignment has been confirmed. The 2024 statue discovery was reported in multiple archaeological publications. This isn't speculation. These are documented finds. The technology at Nevali Sari is real. Terrazzo floors require burning limestone to make quicklime. Chemical analysis confirms the composition. The temperatures required can be calculated. This is sophisticated material science being practiced 11,000 years ago. The pattern across the Tash Tepeler sites is consistent. Monumental sacred architecture appearing immediately after the Younger Dryas. No gradual development. Suddenly, people who supposedly just figured out farming are cutting 20-ton pillars from bedrock and carving them with intricate designs. The skull cults are well documented. Plastered skulls have been found at multiple Neolithic sites. The practice of keeping ancestors close is a response to existential insecurity. When the world is dangerous and unpredictable, you need all the protection you can get. The spread of agriculture shows up in the archaeobotanical record. Domesticated wheat and barley appear in the Levant around 9500 BCE. Rice in China around 8500 BCE. Maize in Mexico around 7000 BCE. Different regions domesticating different crops independently, all within a few thousand years of each other, all after major climate disruptions in their regions. The skeletal pathology of early farmers has been studied extensively. They're shorter than hunter-gatherers. They have more cavities. They show signs of anemia and infectious disease. Their bones display stress markers from repetitive labor. The health data shows agricultural transition was physically costly. Part 5. The global pattern. This isn't just a Near Eastern story. The pattern repeats globally. Every continent has evidence of post-glacial catastrophe and forced adaptation. In North America, the Clovis culture was thriving before the Younger Dryas. They were sophisticated hunters with distinctive fluted projectile points. Their artifacts are found across the continent. And then at 12,900 years ago, the culture disappears. The megafauna they hunted goes extinct. The archaeological record shows a major population decline. The oral traditions remember. Multiple Native American groups describe a time when the sky caught fire and the earth shook. The Hopi speak of the destruction of the Third World. The Pacific Northwest tribes have detailed accounts of great earthquakes and tsunamis. These aren't just mythology. These are memories of the Cascadia subduction zone megathrust earthquakes that repeatedly devastated the coast. In South America, the terminal Pleistocene was equally traumatic. The Yunu-Pachacuti traditions describe Viracocha destroying the giants with fire from heaven and floods from the earth. Lake Titicaca's water level fluctuated wildly during the Holocene. Sediment cores show periods when the lake dropped nearly 100 meters. The entire Altiplano culture would have been devastated. The Cerro Blanco eruption around 4,200 years ago was the largest Holocene volcanic eruption in the central Andes. VEI 7. The ash would have blanketed the region. Agriculture would have failed. Populations would have crashed. Earlier unmapped eruptions during the deglaciation period would have had similar effects. In Australia, the Aboriginal oral traditions are the most precisely datable flood memories on Earth. Groups along the coast describe specific landscapes that are now underwater. Spencer Gulf in South Australia was dry land. Port Phillip Bay near Melbourne was a hunting ground. These stories describe geography that hasn't existed for 7,000 to 13,000 years, and the stories have been verified against geological reconstructions. This is unprecedented. It proves that oral traditions can preserve accurate information across hundreds of generations. What we dismissed as myths are actually geomythology. The stories encode genuine observations of environmental change. The European record shows major disruption during the Younger Dryas. The Alarod culture disappears. The recovery doesn't come until the Preboreal period after 9600 BCE. The Doggerland flooding is a separate later event around 6200 BCE from the Storegga slide. In Africa, the Sahara went through dramatic climate swings. The African humid period between 11,000 and 5,000 years ago turned the Sahara green. Lakes and rivers appeared. Animals and humans moved in. And then it ended. The monsoons shifted. The desert returned. The populations that had moved into the Sahara had to move out. This forced migration into the Nile Valley created the demographic pressure that led to Egyptian civilization. The pattern is global: climate disruption, population displacement, resource scarcity, forced innovation, the appearance of agriculture, monuments, and eventually writing. Every early civilization has this origin story. And every early civilization has flood traditions. The Sumerian king list, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the biblical Noah, the Indian Manu, the Greek Deucalion, the Aztec versions, the Chinese versions. Over 500 flood traditions documented worldwide. The conventional explanation is that floods are common and people naturally develop flood stories. But that doesn't explain the specific shared elements: the warning of impending disaster, the construction of survival vessels, the preservation of animals and seeds, the landing on a mountain, the sacrifice afterward, the renewal of the world. These specific story beats repeat across cultures that had no contact with each other. The shared structure suggests shared experience. Not a single global flood, but multiple regional catastrophes that created similar cultural memories. Now let me tell you what this all means, because this isn't just an interesting historical footnote. This rewrites what it means to be human. We think civilization is humanity's triumph, the steady march of progress from caves to cities, from hunting and gathering to industry and technology. We see ourselves as the culmination of a long climb toward enlightenment. But that's not what happened. Civilization is a trauma response. Look at the timeline. Anatomically, modern humans existed for 300,000 years. Behaviorally, modern humans for at least 100,000 years. For the vast majority of that time, we lived as mobile hunter-gatherers in small groups. We had art, music, language, culture, spirituality. We were fully human. And we were fine. Life wasn't nasty, brutish, and short. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers show they work about 15 to 20 hours per week to meet their needs. They have extensive leisure time. They have strong social bonds. They have low rates of violence. They have detailed knowledge of their environments. The idea that hunter-gatherer life was desperately hard is agricultural propaganda. It's the justification we tell ourselves for why farming was adopted. But the evidence says farming made life harder. People got shorter, sicker. They worked longer hours. They had less diverse diets. They lived in larger groups which spread disease. So why did they do it? Because they had to. The Younger Dryas impact destroyed the easy option. The megafauna that had been reliable food sources went extinct. The wild grain stands burned. The climate became unstable. The world that had sustained mobile foraging for thousands of years ended. The survivors couldn't go back to the old ways. The ecological basis for that lifestyle was gone. So they innovated. They figured out how to domesticate the plants and animals that remained. They built permanent settlements because they needed to stay near their crops. They developed new technologies because the old ones weren't sufficient. Agriculture wasn't invented, it was inflicted. And everything that came after agriculture was part of the same trauma response. Permanent settlements meant new diseases from living in close quarters with domesticated animals. Disease meant you needed more people to maintain population. More people meant you needed more food. More food meant more intensive agriculture. More intensive agriculture meant you needed organization. Organization meant hierarchy. Hierarchy meant inequality. The monuments weren't celebrations. They were acts of obsessive control. Göbekli Tepe's pillars are oriented to celestial events because the survivors needed to know the sky was following predictable patterns, that it wouldn't explode again. The winter solstice alignments at Karahan Tepe are prayers that the sun will return, that the darkness won't last forever. The skull cults were attempts to keep the ancestors present, to maintain connection with the world before the catastrophe, to have guides through the chaos. Writing was invented to administer food stores and track labor obligations. It's accounting first. Literature comes later. The very foundation of recorded history is resource management in a world of scarcity. States arose because somebody had to organize the response to climate chaos. Irrigation systems needed coordination. Flood defenses needed labor. Conflicts over reduced resources needed adjudication. Kingship wasn't about glory. It was about managing crisis. Every aspect of civilization as we know it can be traced back to that moment 12,900 years ago when the sky caught fire. We are not the inheritors of a great human tradition of progress. We are the descendants of traumatized refugees who had to invent new ways to survive after their world ended. And we never stop being traumatized. Look at modern civilization. We work constantly. We destroy our health pursuing productivity. We accumulate resources far beyond our needs. We build monuments to our own importance. We create systems of control that manage every aspect of human life. We watch the sky nervously every time there's a near-Earth asteroid. We monitor sea levels obsessively. We prepare for catastrophes that haven't happened yet. This is the behavior of a species that remembers, deep in its collective unconscious, that the world can end at any moment. That safety is temporary. That everything we build can be washed away. We live in the post-apocalypse. We always have. The last 11,600 years aren't the story of human civilization. They're the story of human recovery. Everything we call progress is actually just coping mechanisms for species-wide PTSD. The real kicker, it's happening again. The climate is destabilizing. Sea levels are rising. We're in the early stages of the same pattern that destroyed the world 12,000 years ago. Except this time it's not a comet impact. It's us. We're the catastrophe. And we're responding exactly the same way our ancestors did. We're building. We're organizing. We're trying to control the chaos. Because that's what we do. That's what we've always done. We don't know how to do anything else. So let me bring this together. The world that ended before the Great Flood was real. It wasn't Atlantis. It wasn't a lost high-tech civilization with flying cars and lasers. It was the late Pleistocene Earth, with its exposed continental shelves and its stable megafauna populations and its thriving mobile foraging cultures. That world was destroyed by a cosmic impact 12,900 years ago and the subsequent climate chaos. The survivors clustered in refuge areas. They developed agriculture out of necessity. They built monuments as trauma management. They created civilizations as systems of control to prevent the chaos from returning. The evidence is comprehensive. The Younger Dryas impact is documented in geological layers. The meltwater pulses are recorded in sea level data. The submerged landscapes are mapped on the ocean floor. The forced migrations show up in genetic studies. The trauma response is written in stone at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. The agricultural adoption is visible in skeletal pathology. This isn't fringe archaeology. This is the consilience of multiple lines of evidence from multiple disciplines. Geology, climatology, archaeology, genetics, anthropology, and comparative mythology all pointing to the same conclusion. Human history doesn't begin 5,000 years ago. It begins hundreds of thousands of years ago. But recorded history begins 5,000 years ago because that's when the survivors of the catastrophe finally had enough stability to write things down. Everything before that is underwater. Everything before that is buried. Everything before that exists only in the fragmented memories preserved in flood traditions and creation myths. We are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are the descendants of the traumatized. Our cities are monuments to lost worlds. Our farms are desperation measures. Our states are crisis management systems. Our writing is trauma documentation. The world that ended before the Great Flood was the world where humans lived as we evolved to live. Mobile, egalitarian, connected to the land, working minimal hours, enjoying extensive leisure. That world is gone. It drowned under 400 feet of seawater. What remains are the descendants of the refugees who fled to the highlands and invented agriculture because everything better was destroyed. We tell ourselves we chose civilization. We tell ourselves we progressed from barbarism to enlightenment. But the truth is we had civilization thrust upon us by geological catastrophe, and we've been trying to recover ever since. The flood didn't just drown landscapes. It drowned a way of life. It drowned human potential. It forced us into patterns of behavior that we've never escaped. Every story about a golden age before the fall, that's the memory. Every tradition about a great flood, that's the memory. Every myth about gods who walked the earth and taught humans the arts of civilization. That's the memory of refugees from drowned coastlines bringing their knowledge to the highlands. The myths are real, just not in the way we thought. They're not fantasies. They're compressed histories. They're attempts by pre-literate peoples to preserve memories of real events through oral tradition. And those oral traditions worked. The Aboriginal Australians preserved accurate coastal geography for 13,000 years through nothing but stories passed from generation to generation. The Mesopotamians preserved the memory of the drowned Persian Gulf oasis. The Indians preserved the memory of post-glacial flooding. The myths are geomythology. So when you look at modern civilization, remember this. Every farm you see is a scar. Every city is a fortress against chaos. Every written document is a desperate attempt to preserve knowledge that was almost lost. Every hierarchy is a control system designed to manage scarcity. Every ritual is a prayer that the world won't end again. We are not the masters of the earth. We are its traumatized children, still trying to recover from what happened to our ancestors 12,000 years ago. Still trying to prevent it from happening again. Still building, still organizing, still controlling. Because control is the only response we know to a cosmos that proved itself violently indifferent to human survival. The world ended, we survived, and we've been paying the price ever since. Subscribe if you want to understand what else they're not telling you about the past.